You are listening to Silent Waves Radio. I am Alex Mercer, and we are interrupting our regular programming to bring you breaking developments out of the Federal Republic of Valdoria, a nation of approximately 44 million people situated in the heart of Central Europe, bordered to the west by Hungary and Romania, and to the east by the emerging autonomous region that its own government still officially calls the Eastern Sulka Administrative Zone. What we are receiving now, and I want to be careful about how I characterize these initial reports because verification is still ongoing, are multiple confirmed accounts of armed exchanges between federal military units and paramilitary forces aligned with the Eastern Valdorian Democratic Front, the EVDF, in and around the city of Sulka, which sits roughly 300 kilometers east of the capital, Novarsk. We received the first credible report at 22 minutes past the hour. We have been working to confirm it since. We are now confident enough to say the following. Something is happening in Valdoria that goes beyond a border skirmish or a protest turned violent. The scale and the coordination suggest this was planned.
Alex and I want to add to what you just said because while the strategic picture is still coming into focus, we are already receiving messages here at the station from listeners who have family in Sulka, in Drevka, in Morvash. People who are describing what they are hearing right now, tonight, from relatives on the phone. One message that came in just before we went to air reads, and I'm going to read this exactly as it was sent to us. My sister lives 3 blocks from the Sulka Central Station. She called me 20 minutes ago. She said she could hear artillery, not gunfire, not fireworks. She said it sounded like the ground was breathing. That's a direct quote from a listener we'll call VM, who asked us not to use her full name. She is currently in Novarsk and cannot reach her sister anymore. The call dropped. That detail matters. Communication disruption in Sulka is already being reported, and we don't yet know whether that is infrastructure failure, deliberate jamming, or simply network overload from a panicked population all trying to reach loved ones at the same time.
To give our listeners context, because context is everything in the early hours of a developing situation, the Federal Republic of Valdoria has been under significant political strain for the better part of 3 years. President Arlen Voss, who came to power following the 2019 elections, suspended parliamentary sessions in January of this year, citing what his government described as a national security emergency related to separatist organizing in the East. That suspension was never lifted. It has now been 11 months since Valdoria's parliament has convened. The Eastern Valdorian Democratic Front, led by a former regional governor named Theodor Brask, has been demanding either a formal autonomy referendum for the Sulka region or the reinstatement of democratic institutions at the federal level. The EVDF is not a fringe organization. Intelligence assessments from multiple European governments, which have been shared publicly in summary form, estimated their active paramilitary capacity at somewhere between 12 and 17,000 fighters. That is not an insurgency. That is a standing army.
And I think that number, 12 to 17,000, is important to sit with for a moment, because it strips away any illusion that what is beginning tonight is small or containable without enormous cost. We are also getting early reports from the Hungarian border town of Zahony, where officials there are describing an unusual increase in vehicle traffic heading westward out of Valdoria in the last several hours. Nothing that rises yet to the level of a mass evacuation, but border officials are noting it. People who may have had foreknowledge, people with resources enough to move quickly, are already moving. That is almost always one of the earliest visible signs of what is about to unfold, and it is happening right now as we speak. The families who cannot move quickly, the elderly, the poor, the ones who have nowhere to go, they are the ones who will bear the weight of whatever is coming. They always are.
We have just received a statement from the office of President Arlen Voss. I am going to read this in full because we believe every word of official government communication should be on the public record in moments like this. Quote, "The federal government of the Republic of Valdoria has authorized the armed forces to conduct necessary stabilization operations in the Eastern Administrative Zone following a coordinated and premeditated terrorist attack on federal military installations in and around the city of Sulka. The perpetrators are known affiliates of the Eastern Valdorian Democratic Front, a criminal organization that has received material support from foreign actors hostile to the sovereignty of Valdoria. The government assures all citizens that this situation will be resolved quickly and with minimal disruption to civilian life. A state of emergency has been formally declared in the Eastern Administrative Zone effective immediately. Citizens are advised to remain in their homes and comply with all directives from federal security personnel." End quote. I want to note for our listeners that the framing of this statement is significant. The government is calling the EVDF a terrorist organization. They are invoking foreign interference. These are rhetorical choices that have consequences.
And the EVDF has responded. We received their statement approximately 6 minutes after the presidential office released theirs, which tells you this was not improvised. I want to read the relevant portion. The Eastern Valdorian Democratic Front confirms that its forces have engaged federal military units that entered the Sulka region in violation of the April Accords. We did not fire the first shot. The government of Arlen Voss has chosen war against its own people. We call upon the international community to recognize the legitimate aspirations of 4 million Valdorian citizens who have been denied their democratic rights for nearly a year. We will defend our homes. We ask for your witness. That last line, "we ask for your witness," is going to stay with me. There's a quality to it that feels both desperate and deliberate. They know that whoever controls the narrative of these first hours shapes the story that will be told for decades.
We are now approximately 2.5 hours into confirmed reporting on this situation. Our correspondents on the ground in Novarsk, the capital, describe the city as largely quiet at street level, but note that there are visible military vehicle movements on the main boulevards leading eastward out of the city. The Novarsk International Airport has confirmed on its public website that all departing flights are suspended until further notice. Arriving flights are being diverted to Budapest and Bucharest. The airport authority cited, quote, "operational security concerns," unquote. That is extraordinary in scope. Novarsk handles approximately 3 million passengers annually. Shutting it down, even temporarily, is not a precautionary measure. It is a wartime measure. The government knows what this is, even if the statement they released does not say so plainly.
I want to bring in something our producer just pulled from the Valdorian National News Service, which is still broadcasting. Those sources tell us editorial staff there have been told what they can and cannot say. The service is reporting, in its own framing, that security operations are proceeding normally in the east. They have not mentioned civilian casualties. They have not mentioned that the city of Sulka appears, based on everything we are receiving, to be under active bombardment in at least 2 districts. A journalist who works for an independent Valdorian outlet and who we are not naming for their protection reached out to us through an encrypted channel approximately 40 minutes ago and said, and I'm quoting directly from the message, "I am in Sulka. I can see smoke from 3 separate locations from my window. The old bridge over the Sulka River, the one near the market, has been hit. I don't know if it's standing. I can't get close enough to see. I am frightened. We are grateful they reached out. We are worried about them."
The old bridge over the Sulka River is a significant piece of infrastructure. It is one of only 2 vehicle crossings over the river within the city limits and serves as a critical link for supply convoys, emergency vehicles, and civilian evacuation routes heading westward. If it has been struck, and we cannot yet confirm the extent of damage, the logistical implications for the civilian population of Sulka are serious. We are also receiving unconfirmed reports that federal forces have moved to secure the Drevka industrial corridor, which is approximately 80 kilometers north of Sulka. Drevka is important for several reasons. It houses the primary fuel refinery that supplies the eastern third of the country. It is also home to approximately 200,000 people. Any military operation in Drevka that escalates in the way Sulka has would affect fuel supply lines for the entire eastern region. We are watching that situation closely. We do not want to outrun the facts, but we are watching.
We're going to take a brief listener message now. We've asked listeners to reach out if they have information or if they simply need to be heard. This one came in from a man who says he is currently driving westward from the Sulka region. He recorded it on his phone and sent it to us. I'm going to read it as received. I left at 10 o'clock tonight. I took my mother and my daughter. We had 2 bags. That's all we could carry. The road west out of Sulka was already backed up for kilometers. People were driving on the shoulder. I saw a family whose car had broken down, an older couple and 2 children. I stopped and I put them in my car. We are now 8 people in a vehicle built for 5. We have been driving for 3 hours and have covered maybe 40 kilometers. I don't know where we are going. I just know that the sound behind us tells me we cannot stop.
It is now approaching 6 hours since the first confirmed reports emerged. Casualty figures at this stage are inherently unreliable, and I want to be responsible in how I present what we have. The EVDF has issued a statement claiming that federal airstrikes have killed at least 43 civilians in the Sulka residential districts of Karev and South Morova. The federal government has not acknowledged civilian deaths. They have acknowledged obliquely that, quote, precision operations are ongoing. Independent humanitarian organizations with staff in the region have not yet been able to reach those districts to conduct independent verification. What we can say with some confidence is that Sulka General Hospital has been posting to its publicly accessible emergency status board, a system designed to communicate capacity to incoming ambulances, and that board has moved from green status to red status within the last 90 minutes. Red status means the hospital is at or beyond capacity. Whatever is happening in those residential districts, the medical system is already feeling it.
I have to pause on the hospital for a moment because I think people who haven't worked in or near conflict zones sometimes don't understand what hospital capacity means in these early hours. It doesn't just mean beds. It means surgical teams, blood supply, power, water, the ability to sterilize instruments. Sulka General has approximately 800 beds under normal operation. Going to red status this early before a conflict has even entered its first full day is alarming. And we are receiving word, and this is unconfirmed, from a medical worker who reached out through a contact of ours in the region, that the hospital's backup generator failed sometime in the last hour. I want to say that again. The backup generator at the main hospital in a city that is under active bombardment has reportedly failed. If that is accurate, and I am stressing the word if, surgeries cannot proceed. Ventilators cannot run. The most vulnerable patients face the most immediate danger, not from shells, but from darkness and silence in the wards.
We have just been notified by the Romanian Foreign Ministry, via a statement posted to their official government website, that the border crossing at Naidlac has been reinforced with additional personnel, and that Romania is, quote, prepared to receive Valdorian nationals who seek shelter on Romanian territory. That is a significant statement. It is an implicit acknowledgement by a NATO member state that the situation in Valdoria may produce a refugee flow significant enough to require national-level preparation. Hungary has not yet issued a comparable statement, but our correspondents in Budapest report that government officials there have been in emergency session since approximately 1 in the morning local time. Poland has issued a general statement of concern. We have not yet heard from any major powers beyond the region. It is worth noting that the European Union's External Action Service has called an emergency session of its Political and Security Committee for early morning. The international machinery of response is beginning to move, but it moves slowly, and Sulka cannot wait for committees.
12 hours. We have now been covering the situation for 12 hours. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that for many of our listeners, you may have woken up this morning and tuned in expecting our regular programming, and instead you found this. We are here. We will stay here. I also want to acknowledge something about the human reality of what 12 hours means in a place like Sulka right now. 12 hours without confirmed rescue services reaching certain districts. 12 hours of a hospital at red capacity. 12 hours of a family in an overloaded car on a jammed road. 12 hours in which the world outside Valdoria is still largely waking up, making coffee, checking phones, seeing a headline and not yet understanding what it means. The gap between those two experiences, the lived emergency and the distant awareness, is a chasm. We try to build a bridge across it. That is what we are doing today.
Overnight casualty estimates from international humanitarian monitoring organizations are now being released. The International Crisis Monitoring Consortium, which operates independently and whose methodology has been peer-reviewed, puts the preliminary death toll from the first 12 hours of conflict at between 80 and 140 individuals, acknowledging wide margins due to access limitations. Of those, they estimate 60 to 70% are civilian. Federal military casualties are unverified by independent sources. The EVDF has claimed significant losses among advancing federal units, but we cannot independently confirm that either. What we do know with increasing certainty is that the conflict has not remained contained to Sulka. Reports from the town of Varen, approximately 120 kilometers northeast of Sulka, and a town of roughly 60,000 people, indicate that EVDF-affiliated fighters have established control over the local administrative buildings and the main police station there. The federal government has not commented on Varen specifically. The silence around that detail is notable.
The situation in Varen is something I want to dwell on because what it represents is not just a military development, it is a social one. When armed groups, regardless of which side they represent, take control of civilian administrative buildings in a town of 60,000 people, the immediate effect is the collapse of local governance. Who processes a medical emergency? Who maintains water treatment? Who ensures that the fuel depot at the edge of town does not become either a military target or a source of chaos if civilians begin desperate attempts to access it? These are not abstract questions. They are questions that 60,000 people in Varen are asking right now, and the answer in each case is, we don't know yet. The systems that hold daily life together are extraordinarily fragile, and they are fraying in at least 2 cities simultaneously. By the end of this week, we may be talking about a dozen.
We are receiving our first substantial international political response. The Secretary General of the United Nations has issued a statement calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities and urging all parties to protect civilian life. We will not dwell on the diplomatic language at length, but I will note that the call for all parties to protect civilians implies an acknowledgement that the conflict has 2 recognized parties, which is itself a subtle but meaningful departure from the federal government's insistence that it is conducting a counterterrorism operation against criminals. The United States State Department has urged Americans in Valdoria to shelter in place or depart immediately if it is safe to do so. The German foreign minister is traveling to Bucharest for consultations. NATO has issued a statement noting that it is monitoring the situation closely, a phrase that has appeared in many NATO statements and which, historically, precedes weeks of deliberation before action. We are 20 hours into this conflict.
We've received another message that I want to share with you. This one is from a woman who says she's a teacher in the Morvash region, which is in western Valdoria, several hundred kilometers from the fighting. She writes, I have 31 students. Their ages are between 9 and 12. This morning when I arrived at school, 11 of them were not there. Their parents had kept them home. The 20 students who came asked me questions I don't know how to answer. One boy asked me if his grandfather, who lives in Sulka, is going to be all right. I told him that people are working very hard to keep everyone safe. I don't know if that is true. I said it because he is 10 years old and he needed me to say something. I am asking you to please keep reporting because information is the only thing that makes this feel less like it is ending.
It is now the end of the first full day of the Valdorian conflict. Our best compiled figure for civilian deaths, drawing from the International Crisis Monitoring Consortium, the Valdorian Red Cross Society, and 3 independent field reports, stands at between 200 and 260 individuals. Military deaths on both sides are unverified, but intelligence sources speaking anonymously to multiple European news organizations estimate federal military losses at between 40 and 80 soldiers, and EVDF losses at a comparable range. These are, in the darkest possible accounting, the opening numbers. History tells us they will grow. The port of Elena on the southern coast, Valdoria's largest maritime facility, and the conduit for roughly 40% of the country's commercial imports, has suspended all operations. Port workers have reportedly fled the terminal area following federal announcements that the port is now under military authority. Fuel imports will now be delayed. That will affect the entire country, not just the East.
Day 2. We have been here for over 24 hours now, and I want to be honest with our listeners that our team is showing the strain of sustained coverage. But we are staying because the story demands it, and because the people inside Valdoria deserve to know the world is paying attention. The overnight hours brought a significant development. The power grid serving the eastern Sulka basin has failed. This is not a localized outage. This is a failure of the regional grid infrastructure. Power to the city of Sulka, to Varin, and to a belt of smaller towns encompassing perhaps 800,000 people has been offline since approximately 3 in the morning, local time. We do not know the cause. It could be battle damage to transmission lines. It could be a deliberate act of sabotage. It could be the result of the Drevka fuel refinery restricting output due to military presence. What we know is the effect. 800,000 people without electricity, without refrigeration for food and medicine, without streetlights, without the ability to charge phones that are the only lifeline to family and to information.
The communication blackout in the power-affected region is now creating a secondary crisis. Informational vacuum. When people cannot receive information, 2 things happen simultaneously. Rumor fills the space where fact should be, and decision-making becomes impossible. We are already seeing evidence of both. Social media posts originating from just outside the blackout zone are reporting, without substantiation, that the federal government has used chemical agents in one Sulka district. We have no independent evidence of that claim, and we are treating it as unverified. But the fact that it is circulating matters, because people inside and outside the region are making decisions based on it. The federal government has denied the allegation in strong terms. The EVDF has not commented directly. What we can say is that international chemical weapons monitoring bodies have stated publicly that they have no evidence at this time to support the claim. We will continue to monitor.
3 days in, and the refugee numbers are becoming measurable. The Romanian Border Authority confirmed this morning that approximately 31,000 Valdorian nationals have crossed into Romania in the past 72 hours. Hungary has received roughly 22,000. A smaller number, perhaps 8,000, have crossed into Poland through the northern passes. These numbers will seem large to anyone who has not studied displacement before. To anyone who has, they signal only the beginning. The UN's Refugee Agency has activated its emergency response protocol and is coordinating with host governments to establish reception centers. The situation is described as manageable at present. That word, manageable, appears in every early assessment of every refugee crisis, almost without exception, right up until it stops being true.
Let me give you an update on the military picture as best we understand it. Federal Valdorian forces, which number approximately 80,000 active personnel supplemented by reserve units now being mobilized, are conducting operations on at least 3 distinct fronts. The urban environment of Sulka itself, the approaches to Varen in the northeast, and a third theater that has only emerged in the past 24 hours, a corridor along the eastern mountain range where EVDF fighters appear to have established fortified positions. The EVDF's territorial control, according to the best mapping we have available from open-source intelligence analysts, now encompasses somewhere between 12 and 18% of Valdoria's eastern territory. That is territory roughly the size of Slovenia. It contains approximately 3.5 million people. The federal government's position that this is a counter-terrorism operation is straining credibility at that scale. What we are describing is a territorial war.
Day 4. The Sulka River Bridge, the one our correspondent mentioned in the first hours of this broadcast, has been confirmed destroyed. Images shared by individuals who have since left the city show the central span collapsed into the river. This is no longer about communication lines. The western evacuation route by road for the eastern Sulka residential districts is now extraordinarily complicated. The second bridge, which is 3 kilometers to the south, remains intact as of our last report, but access to it requires passing through an area of active exchange between federal and EVDF forces. The United Nations has formally requested safe passage corridors for civilian evacuation through both sides. The federal government said it would consider the request. The EVDF said they would honor any ceasefire agreement for humanitarian movement if the federal government would agree to one. The federal government has not responded to that condition. People are not moving out of those districts through official channels. They are moving through courtyards, through river margins, through whatever gaps they can find in the line of fire.
We have a confirmed death toll update from the International Crisis Monitoring Consortium as of this morning. Their revised estimate for total conflict-related deaths in the first 4 days stands at 1,040, with a margin of error they describe as significant due to access limitations in the power blackout zones. That number encompasses what they can verify or credibly estimate. The actual number is likely higher. Of those deaths, they estimate approximately 65% are civilians. That proportion is consistent with what we see in early-phase urban conflicts globally. It is a number that demands to be said plainly: 676 civilians, approximately, dead in 4 days of fighting in a European nation of 44 million people. That is not a statistic to abstract. Those are individual lives, each with a name that no one outside their family may ever know.
Day 5. I want to tell you about something that happened this morning that we believe illustrates what is still human in the middle of this. A doctor, a woman named only as Dr. A in communications we have received because she fears for her safety, has been operating out of a converted community center in the Karev district of Sulka, which is inside the conflict zone. She has no electricity. She is operating with handheld flashlights. She has performed surgeries by flashlight. She has run out of anesthesia for minor procedures and is using alcohol as a substitute in some cases. She sent out a message through a satellite communicator that one of her volunteers had, and the message reached a humanitarian network that forwarded it to us. It reads in part, "We need blood. We need gauze. We need anyone who can carry supplies to be brave enough to try. We are not giving up in here. Please don't give up on us out there." International humanitarian organizations have acknowledged they are aware of her situation and are attempting to coordinate a supply delivery. As of airtime, no delivery has reached the community center.
On day 6, the conflict has produced its first significant international incident. A convoy of vehicles carrying European humanitarian observers traveling under United Nations identification was fired upon at a checkpoint on the road between Novarsk and Sulka. 2 observers were wounded. One, a Dutch national, is in serious condition and has been evacuated to a hospital in Budapest. No fatalities have been confirmed. The federal government has blamed EVDF snipers operating in that corridor. The EVDF has denied involvement and called for an independent investigation. The incident has immediately elevated international alarm. Several European foreign ministers have now issued joint statements demanding immediate guarantees for humanitarian access. The NATO Council has been convened in emergency session for the 2nd time this week. The pressure on the federal government of Valdoria is intensifying. At the same time, we are learning that the federal government has received a delivery of military materiel from a 3rd country that has not been publicly identified, routed through a port outside the sanctions monitoring network. This conflict is no longer purely domestic in its resourcing.
1 week. 7 days since the first shells fell on Sulka. I've been trying to think about what to say to mark this moment, and I keep coming back to the fact that 7 days is also how long the people of Karev district have been without reliable water service. 7 days is how long the night staff of Sulka General Hospital has been working consecutive shifts with inadequate relief. 7 days is how long families on both sides of the river have been unable to confirm whether the people they love on the other side are alive. We have words for 7 days. A week, a chapter, a before and after. For the people living inside it, it has been continuous. There has been no pause, no reset, no quiet morning where the news was manageable. It has simply been one long and terrible day divided by darkness that brings no rest.
As we enter the 2nd week of the Valdorian conflict, I want to give you the clearest possible picture of the military and territorial situation as of this morning. EVDF forces now control or contest approximately 22% of Valdorian territory in the east. Federal forces have reinforced positions around Drevka and have, by most assessments, secured the fuel refinery there, though at significant cost in personnel. The city of Varen has changed hands twice in the past 4 days, and as of our latest information, is under contested control, meaning neither side fully controls it and both are present within its limits. Urban contested control is among the most dangerous conditions for civilian populations in any conflict. When lines of control are unclear and fluid, neither side feels responsibility for civilian protection, and both sides treat the civilian space as a potential threat environment. The residents of Varen, 60,000 people, are effectively trapped in the space between 2 armies that don't fully know where each other ends.
Day 8, and the Drevka fuel refinery situation, now that federal forces control it, has created a new humanitarian complication. The EVDF controls access roads feeding into the refinery from the east, and has announced it will not allow fuel transport through those corridors. The federal government controls the refinery but cannot move fuel efficiently to the eastern region it is trying to pacify. The result? A fuel crisis for the very federal military operations that require fuel. More critically for civilians, the fuel shortage is affecting heating systems in what is a cold climate country in the tail end of its autumn. Average temperature in the region at this time of year is between 4 and 8 degrees Celsius overnight. That is cold enough to kill vulnerable populations without heating. Hospitals without power are already struggling. A fuel shortage that removes heating from community centers and shelters adds another layer of mortal danger to people who are already in extraordinary peril.
The refugee numbers from the end of the first week and into the beginning of the second are significantly higher than the early totals. Romania is now hosting approximately 112,000 Valdorian nationals. Hungary, approximately 87,000. Poland, 41,000. Smaller numbers have crossed into Austria and Slovakia. The total external displacement figure is approaching 300,000 individuals. That number represents roughly 0.7% of Valdoria's total population. Internally, the displacement figure is almost certainly larger, as hundreds of thousands of people have moved from eastern regions toward the capital and the west without crossing international borders. The UN estimates total displacement, internal and external, at somewhere between 600 and 800,000 people as of the end of week 1. To contextualize, this is already, in its first week, one of the largest displacement events in Europe since the conflicts of the 1990s.
Day 10. We received a call from a listener in Novarsk, the capital. He asked not to be identified and said the following, and I'm going to try to convey this as close to his words as I can. People here are not sure what to believe. The government television says that the East is being stabilized and that normal life will resume soon. But everyone has a cousin or a friend from the East, and none of those people are calling it stable. The stores are starting to run low on some things. Not everything, but some things. My neighbor bought 30 kilos of rice yesterday. I don't think she was being irrational. I think she was being honest about what she thinks might come. That voice, the Novarsk neighbor buying rice, is important. The capital city is 400 kilometers from the heaviest fighting, and the ordinary signals of societal uncertainty, the hoarding, the quiet dread, the gap between official narrative and lived knowledge are already present there.
Day 12 brings us what we must describe as a significant military escalation. Federal forces have conducted their largest single operation since the conflict began. A combined armor and infantry advance on the EVDF-controlled town of Bravar, approximately 40 kilometers south of Sulka. Bravar has a population of approximately 90,000 people and sits astride a critical road junction. The battle for Bravar lasted, by early assessments, approximately 18 hours. By the time it was over, federal forces had retaken the town center. The cost was considerable. The EVDF has claimed that federal forces suffered over 200 casualties in the Bravar operation. Federal sources have not released casualty figures. Independent analysts reviewing satellite imagery of the town describe, quote, significant structural damage across multiple city blocks, consistent with armored vehicle engagement in an urban environment. 90,000 residents, 18 hours of urban combat. The physical fabric of that town will bear those marks for a generation, if it survives to have one.
13 days. The International Crisis Monitoring Consortium has released a new cumulative death toll estimate. Total deaths from the conflict as of day 13 are estimated at between 5,200 and 6,800 individuals. The wide range reflects the ongoing access limitations in power blackout zones and contested areas. Of those deaths, the consortium estimates approximately 62% are civilian. That's roughly 3,500 to 4,200 civilians in 13 days. The federal government has issued its first official casualty statement, acknowledging the deaths of 312 military personnel. Military analysts consider this figure likely to be an undercount. The EVDF has not released its own official military casualties, though unverified reports from the field suggest losses of several hundred fighters. What is not in dispute is the civilian toll, and it is the civilian toll that is driving the international pressure that is now building in ways that are beginning to be consequential.
Day 15, the halfway point of the first month, and a day on which two developments of consequence have occurred. The first, the European Union has formally invoked its emergency humanitarian intervention framework, which authorizes the dispatch of EU-coordinated aid convoys into conflict-affected regions, subject to safety conditions. The federal government has accepted EU aid access in principle, though negotiations over access routes and the role of EU personnel are ongoing. The EVDF has welcomed the announcement. The second development, the Valdorian National Power Grid Authority has announced that it can no longer guarantee stable power supply to western regions of the country, including the capital Novarsk, due to the cumulative impact of damage to Eastern Generation infrastructure and the fuel supply disruption at Drevka. Rolling blackouts in Novarsk are expected to begin within 48 hours. The capital, so far largely insulated from the physical reality of the conflict, is about to feel its first direct material consequence.
And Novarsk going dark, even partially, even temporarily, matters beyond the inconvenience to its citizens. It matters because it signals something to the country's economic and political establishment, the people who have so far been able to hold the conflict at arm's length in their minds, even if not on their maps. When the lights in the capital flicker, something shifts in the perception of what is happening. It is no longer a crisis in the east. It is a crisis in Valdoria, undivided, indifferent to internal borders, touching everyone. We have heard from several Novarsk business owners in the last 24 hours who say they are now seriously considering relocating. Not fleeing, they stress. Relocating. But that distinction will blur quickly if the conditions worsen, and they are worsening.
Day 17. A significant diplomatic development. Following extensive closed-door negotiations facilitated by the European Union and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, both the federal government of Valdoria and the Eastern Valdorian Democratic Front have agreed to a 72-hour humanitarian ceasefire. The ceasefire is described as applying to all active combat operations and is intended to allow humanitarian convoys to reach the most affected areas, including Sulka, Varen, and the surrounding towns. It does not address the political questions. It does not constitute a peace negotiation. It is a pause in killing sufficient to allow food, medicine, blood supplies, and generators to reach people who have been without them for 17 days. It is not a resolution, but it is something. Humanitarian organizations have called it, with notable caution, a lifeline.
The first hours of the ceasefire, and I will tell you honestly that our newsroom fell quiet when the confirmation came through, in a way that I can only describe as the sound of people exhaling something they didn't know they'd been holding. We are receiving reports now of convoys moving, EU-flagged trucks entering from the Romanian border, Red Cross vehicles approaching Sulka on the southern road, the one past the second bridge. A medical team that includes surgeons is reportedly heading toward the community center where Dr. A has been working. Whether they will make it, and what they will find when they do, we don't yet know. But they are moving. There is movement. In 17 days of conflict, that is not nothing.
On day 19, 2 days into the ceasefire, we have 3 updates. First, the humanitarian convoys have largely reached their intended destinations. The ICMC has confirmed delivery of medical supplies to 14 sites across the conflict zone. Sulka General Hospital has received fuel for its generators, blood products, and surgical supplies. Dr. A's community center was reached on day 18. The medical team that arrived found 41 patients, of whom, the report states, all were alive, though several in critical condition. Second, the ceasefire is holding in most areas but has been violated in at least 3 documented incidents. 2 were small-scale exchanges of fire that both sides blame on the other. 1 was more serious, a drone strike on an EVDF supply depot that the federal government has declined to comment on. The EVDF has issued a statement warning that a 4th violation will result in the ceasefire's termination. Third, The EU convoy has confirmed significant evidence of civilian harm consistent with the casualty estimates we have been reporting. Their preliminary field report uses language our listeners should be prepared for. Widespread destruction of residential structures, multiple sites of mass civilian burial in hospital grounds, and evidence of systematic displacement of civilian populations from certain districts. That last phrase, in the context of international law, carries specific and grave implications.
Day 21, 3 weeks. The ceasefire has expired without renewal. Federal forces have resumed operations in the northern approaches to Sulka, and EVDF has responded with a counteroffensive in the Varan corridor that, as of this morning, has pushed federal forces back approximately 15 kilometers. The EVDF's military capability is not degrading the way federal planners appear to have anticipated. They are fighting on terrain they know, with supply lines that are shorter and arguably more resilient than those of the federal army. And they are fighting, according to multiple accounts from the region, with high motivation. That is a deeply uncomfortable asymmetry when the other side has more equipment but longer supply chains and a population at home that is increasingly asking questions about what the war is for.
The protests in Novarsk began on day 22. We are careful to note that this is the first substantial civil unrest in the capital since the conflict began. Thousands of people gathered in Mirova Square and in the streets around the Parliament building, which has been shuttered for 11 months. The crowd, which estimates range from 12,000 to 30,000 depending on the source, was calling for two things: ceasefire negotiations and the reinstatement of Parliament. Federal security forces were present in significant numbers, but did not, as of the last report we received before press time, move against the crowd. President Voss has not appeared publicly in 6 days. His office released a written statement saying he continues to direct military operations and that the situation is developing in Valdoria's favor. That statement was not universally accepted by people standing in Mirova Square at 10 o'clock in the evening, with the lights intermittently dim from rolling blackouts, in a city that can hear, if the wind is right, the distant echo of something that only 21 days ago seemed to belong to someone else.
Day 24, and I want to give our listeners an update on people we have followed through this broadcast. The man who left Sulka on the first night of the conflict, the one with 8 people in a 5-seat car, he reached out again. He and his family are in a reception center near Bucharest. His mother has a cough that he is worried about. His daughter has not spoken much since they arrived. He says the community center where they are staying has people from many parts of the East, and they spend evenings comparing information, trying to figure out together what is happening at home and whether home still exists in the form they knew it. He asked us to tell listeners that the people he met on the road, the strangers who helped each other, were, he said, the best of what we are, even in the worst of what happened.
Day 26. The cumulative death toll estimate from the International Crisis Monitoring Consortium stands now at between 31,000 and 37,000 individuals. That figure represents 3.5 weeks of conflict and includes military personnel on both sides, as well as civilian deaths attributable to direct violence, infrastructure collapse, medical emergency without access to care, and exposure-related deaths among displaced populations in cold conditions. It is the largest loss of life in Europe in a single conflict since the wars that dismembered Yugoslavia in the 1990s. The infrastructure damage is now assessed as follows. 70% of the eastern power grid has sustained damage significant enough to require major repair before restoration. 4 major road bridges have been destroyed or are structurally compromised. Port Elena, the main maritime port, has been non-operational for 22 days. The Sulka River water treatment plant serving the city's eastern districts is offline. 3 dams in the river system have sustained what engineers describe as significant structural stress, 2 of which are being classified as at risk of failure without immediate inspection and repair that cannot currently proceed safely given the conflict.
Day 27, and we are receiving reports that one of the at-risk dams, the Bravar Upper Reservoir Dam, has begun showing visible cracking along its eastern face. The reservoir holds approximately 340 million cubic meters of water. The area immediately downstream includes portions of the Sulka urban area. We are not going to speculate about outcomes that have not occurred, but we are going to tell you exactly what is being said by the engineering personnel who have managed to relay information through available channels. The dam needs immediate inspection. No inspection is possible given the conflict in the surrounding area. No side has agreed to any arrangement that would allow dam engineers safe access. We are watching this closely. We are reporting it now because if conditions change, we want our listeners to know the background.
The Bravar Dam held. I want to say that now so that our listeners who heard the previous report can exhale. Structural engineers attached to an EU rapid assessment team were given safe passage by both sides on day 28, long enough to conduct a preliminary inspection. Their assessment: the cracking is serious, but the dam is not in imminent danger of catastrophic failure. It requires repair within 60 days under normal circumstances. Given what is happening, 60 days is an eternity. But it held. Engineers have installed basic monitoring equipment that will transmit pressure readings remotely. That is not a solution, but it is a margin.
Day 29. We have received, through back channels we are choosing not to detail to protect the individuals involved, what appears to be a credible report of preliminary contact between senior EVDF representatives and European mediators in Vienna. These are not formal negotiations. Both sides have denied that formal negotiations are underway, but the contact has reportedly occurred and occurred more than once. When both sides are talking to a third party simultaneously, even informally, even deniably, the machinery of eventual diplomacy is turning, however slowly. We want to be careful not to create hope that outpaces the reality. Preliminary contact does not mean peace. It does not mean ceasefire. It does not return anyone who has died. But it is a data point that belongs in our reporting, and we are including it.
Day 30. 1 month. The 4 weeks of the Valdorian civil conflict have produced outcomes that we can now, with the benefit of 30 days of continuous reporting and the data available to us, describe with more clarity than was possible in those early hours. Total confirmed and estimated deaths attributable to the conflict stand at approximately 112,000 individuals as of the most recent ICMC release, with analysts noting the figure will likely rise as access improves to areas still contested or only recently reached. Of that total, approximately 68,000 are estimated to be civilians. Approximately 44,000 are estimated to be combatants on both sides. The numbers will be revised. They will almost certainly go up.
A month in, and the physical landscape of eastern Valdoria has been fundamentally altered. The city of Sulka, which had a pre-conflict population of approximately 480,000 people, is now estimated to have a remaining in-place population of somewhere between 80 and 120,000. The rest have fled, been displaced internally, or died. The eastern districts of the city are described by aid workers who have entered as resembling, in their words, a place that went very suddenly from life to stillness. Schools, shops, the market near the old bridge, apartment buildings, all structurally present but emptied of the ordinary noise of people. The bridge itself is in the river. The water is still flowing beneath it.
Now I want to give our listeners the clearest account we can of how this conflict was sparked and what ultimately drove it. The immediate cause of the Valdorian Civil War, as is now established by multiple independent investigations, including the preliminary report of the EU fact-finding mission released 3 days ago, was the decision by President Arlen Voss to not merely suspend Parliament, but to secretly authorize the Federal Security Services to detain, beginning in the weeks before the conflict, a series of EVDF political leadership figures under counterterrorism statutes. Among those detained was the elected regional council chair of the Sulka municipality, a woman named Dara Mosvin, who had held that position through a democratic election in which she received 67% of the vote. Her detention without charge, revealed publicly 4 days before the first shots were fired, appears to have been the triggering event. The EVDF High Command, which had been preparing for a worst-case scenario, determined that the window for political resolution had closed and ordered the mobilization of its paramilitary forces. The first engagement, on the night our broadcast began, was initiated by EVDF units attacking a federal checkpoint outside Sulka that they claim had begun erecting barriers consistent with a preparation to seal the city.
And in the month that followed that first engagement, what Valdoria lost is a category of loss that does not fit neatly into any single number. Approximately 340,000 people died when accounting for the deaths continuing into the early resolution period, and those among refugee populations and conflict indirect deaths confirmed in the weeks following the events of month 1. The eastern region of Valdoria, which the EVDF refers to as the Republic of Sulka, is no longer governed from Novarsk. A negotiated framework brokered in Vienna, the process of which is still ongoing at the time of this broadcast, has established a de facto separation pending a formal political resolution that may take years. Whether Valdoria as a unified nation still exists is a question being answered, slowly and painfully, by diplomats in quiet rooms while the people whose lives split along that fracture live with the consequences every day.
Romania and Hungary have absorbed the largest shares of the displaced, and both governments have signaled that long-term integration support is being planned, a recognition that the majority of the refugee population will not be returning home on any near-term timeline. The infrastructure damage in eastern Valdoria, the destroyed bridges, the damaged power grid, the compromised dams, the shuttered port, will require an estimated 10 to 15 years and an investment that independent economists place at between 80 and 120 billion euros to fully repair. The international aid commitments made as of this broadcast cover approximately 12% of that figure. The gap is not rhetorical. It is the difference between a region that recovers and a region that does not.
The teacher in Morvash, the one who told her students that people were working very hard to keep everyone safe, she reached out to us near the end of week 4. She said that all of her 31 students are accounted for, that 2 of them lost relatives in the fighting, that one of them, the boy who asked about his grandfather in Sulka, learned that his grandfather was alive, that he had spent 3 weeks sheltering in a neighbor's basement, that he had grown a beard for the first time in his life because there was no hot water to shave with, and that he had kept a journal every day of what he saw and heard and thought, so that, in his words as passed along through his grandson, someone would know what it was like to be inside this, because from the outside, you can never really know.
We began this broadcast with uncertainty. Every early hour of every crisis is made of uncertainty, and the discipline of this work is to name what we know, be clear about what we don't, and resist the pressure to fill silence with speculation when silence is the more honest answer. What we know now, 30 days on, is this. The Federal Republic of Valdoria is a fractured country. It is not destroyed. Its people are not gone. Its cities, though damaged, are standing. The dam held. The convoys moved. A doctor operated by flashlight and her patients survived. A family drove a car built for 5 with 8 people in it to safety. These things happened. They are part of the record, too.
What remains of Valdoria is a country in the early, painful stages of reckoning. Reckon with what its government chose, with what its citizens endured, with the question that every nation split by internal conflict must eventually face, is what holds us together stronger than what drove us apart. The answer in Valdoria is not yet known. It may not be known for a generation, but the people we have talked to, the voices we have read to you over 30 days, the teacher, the doctor, the family in the car, the man keeping a journal in his neighbor's basement because he wanted someone to know what it was like to be inside this. Those people have not stopped asking that question. That means the question is still alive. And while the question is alive, so is the possibility of an answer.
To summarize the record of the first month of the Valdorian civil conflict, the proximate cause was the detention of elected civilian officials by the federal government, which triggered the EVDF military mobilization. The underlying causes were 3 years of democratic erosion, economic exclusion of the eastern regions, and a failure of political will on all sides to find a negotiated path before the military one became the only one on offer. Total deaths in the first month and its immediate aftermath, approximately 340,000 people. Eastern Valdoria, the self-declared Republic of Sulka, has separated from federal control and exists in a state of contested but de facto independence. Western and central Valdoria, including the capital Novarsk, continues under federal governance, led by a president whose legitimacy is now disputed both internally and internationally. The port of Elena has begun limited operations. The dams are standing. The power grid is being partially restored. None of this is sufficient. But none of it is nothing.
340,000 people. I want to say that number one more time and not move past it quickly. 340,000 people. That is the population of a mid-sized European city gone in 30 days. Every one of them had a name. Every one of them had a morning routine and a preference in coffee and someone who called them by a name that only close people use. None of that is in the statistics. None of it can be. But it is true, and it is the truest thing we can say about any of this, that it was people and they mattered, and the world should know what happened to them.
You have been listening to Silent Waves Radio's live coverage of the first month of the Valdorian civil conflict. We will continue our coverage as events develop. For our listeners around the world, stay informed, think clearly, and hold tightly to whatever calls you back toward each other. This is Alex Mercer.
And this is Sierra Lane. For the people of Valdoria, on all sides of this fracture, we saw you. We will keep seeing you. This is Silent Waves Radio.